Alright folks, it's time to jump back into my Destiny 2 subclass tier list video series. We're up to episode 8 now, which means we're almost at the finish line. If you missed any of the previous episodes, you can check them out by clicking the link in the top right now. We went over the rules I'm using for the tiering process and talked about a lot of stuff. Way too much to recap now, but just know it's been a really fun ride. Today we're going to continue the tiering process with the Hunter's Void subclass, the Nightstalker. But before we get started, I want to give a special shout out to all of my patrons. Algino, Alex, Avi, Evipen, Ipseus, Jay, Ronan the Ronin, Wade, and everyone else that is willing to provide additional support to this channel. You guys are freaking awesome. And everyone who has provided support in the past, you are still freaking awesome and you always will be. There's going to be more bonus content on its way this month, so stay tuned for that, but for now, let's get started with today's video.
Like everything before it, each subclass branch has access to a set of universal mechanics. For the Nightstalker, we have 2 class abilities, Gambler's Dodge and Marksman's Dodge, 3 jumps, High Jump, Strafe Jump, and Triple Jump, and 3 grenades, Void Wall Grenade, Vortex Grenade, and Spike Grenade. With those mechanics in mind, it's time for us to enter the shadows. We're going to start off with the Master of Stealth, the Ultimate Assassin, the Way of the Wraith. And you know what? Cutting all the bullshit, this is the S tier. This is above S tier. Achievement of Grace? It. Who cares? Code of the Commander? Who's that? Never heard of it. Spectral Blades. This is the best roaming super in the game because you have incredibly powerful light attacks and you have a stupidly powerful heavy strike which gives you invisibility, and then that gives you true sight which allows you to see your enemies, and you've also got increased lunge because of the thing, and it doesn't even matter about anything else because you just defeated the darkness in one fell swoop, and Lord Shaxx finally gives you the love and respect that you've been begging for so long, and even Lord Salad himself is even loving you as well.
Ryan.
Oh, hey man, yeah, just doing the Way of the Wraith, you know, best subclass during the game, that one.
Well, it's very clear to me that you've taken some creative liberties here, and you are writing about the Way of the Wraith all types of wrong.
Why wouldn't you write about it like this? You know, it's the Way of the Wraith.
Yeah, it's the Way of the Wraith, but it's pretty bad.
But I mean, it's the coolest subbranch in the game? The Ultimate Assassin?
Okay, your voice is getting really high-pitched again, so we've got to dial this back. The Way of the Wraith is probably supposed to be one of the best and coolest subclass branches in the game, but it isn't, and we're going to talk about why. Let's start by breaking down the abilities. First up, Flawless Execution is a passive. Precision kills while crouched grant invisibility, true sight, and increased melee range. Shattering Strike is a melee passive. Your melee attacks weaken enemies while Flawless Execution is active. Your melee ability is Corrosive Smoke. You throw a smoke bomb that slows and disorients enemies and damages them over time. Finally, your super is Spectral Blades. Ryan did a pretty good job hyping it up, but the actual description says you summon a pair of deadly void blades and stalk the battlefield in a veil of shadows. Now let's talk about how this stuff works and why it doesn't work that well. First off, the combination of Flawless Execution and Shattering Strike is a cool concept, but it doesn't flow together as well as it should because there's a piece missing. The idea is you get a precision kill on a minor enemy, turn invisible, then look for a major enemy or a mini-boss to hit with Shattering Strike to reduce their defense. Then you blast them to bits with your teammates. That's all well and good, but once you kill the target you've shattered, you're stuck out in the open looking for something else to shoot in the face so you can hide again. That's the issue. The gameplay loop is there, but it has a clear endpoint, namely when you melee something and lose your invisibility. There's a way to restart it, getting another precision kill while you're crouched, but the best gameplay loops feel more self-sustaining and they don't end with such a jarring cut. They flow together with themselves, and I'll put it to you like this. If killing an enemy that's affected with Shattering Strike turned you invisible, the Way of the Wraith would be infinitely better. Next up, Corrosive Smoke is a good melee ability for crowd control, but its damage output is in the toilet and its radius is small. At most, it'll help you lock down a major or a mini-boss for a few seconds, or stop a push from a pack of thralls. There's not much to say about it in its current form, but I do have a wish list of things that would make it a lot better. If its radius were larger, so the control you could exert over the battlefield would be more significant, that'd be great. It would also be a step in the right direction if Corrosive Smoke could apply the effects of Shattering Strikes to enemies. I mean, think about it, with a name like Corrosive Smoke, it would be logical to think that it could corrode enemies' defenses away when they stand in it. Finally, the Spectral Blade super Ryan was trying to hype up is not horrible. It does what a roaming super is supposed to do. It clears out large groups of enemies quickly and efficiently, especially when you have the Gwisen Vest exotic chest piece equipped. The Gwisen Vest exotic perk causes the heavy attack to refund a small chunk of super energy when used after killing an enemy. Unfortunately, like most of the other roaming supers in the game, Spectral Blades damage against single targets feels lackluster, but with that said, Spectral Blades is the best part of the Way of the Wraith, but unfortunately, it's not good enough to bring this subclass branch out of F tier. Now, you might be thinking I'm judging the Hunter subclass branches incredibly harshly, and if you are thinking that, you're correct, but there's reason for it. Compared to the Warlock and the Titan, the Hunter leans the most towards the damage dealer archetype. What I mean is, a Warlock subclass branch that doesn't have phenomenal damage will always have a healing rift or an empowering rift for support. As an example, the Stormcaller's bottom branch has its little Arc Souls. Their damage is pretty low, but you can give them to teammates, and having 3 Arc Souls firing at the same time is like adding another primary weapon to your team. Then we add on top of that the constant flow of healing or empowering rifts, and a lackluster combination becomes playable and valuable, albeit far from the top tier. For the Hunter, if you don't have great damage, if your debuffs are annoying or dangerous to trigger, and if your crowd control and support is weak or non-existent, you're just a guy with a gun that likes to roll around on the floor. And that feels bad. Next up, we have the Hunter's top branch, the Way of the Trapper. Your first ability is a passive called Vanishing Step. Your dodge class ability turns you invisible. Keen Scout is another passive. You sprint and crouch walk faster and gain an enhanced radar. Also, enemies tethered by your super are marked. Your melee ability is Snare Bomb. You throw a smoke bomb that sticks to surfaces and detonates when enemies are nearby, slowing and disorienting them. Finally, Deadfall is a passive ability for your Shadow Shot super. The Void Anchor fired by Shadow Shot becomes a trap and it waits for enemies to come nearby. Void Anchors have increased range and duration. The Way of the Trapper has been in a league of its own because of the Shadow Shot super and the Orpheus Rig exotic boots since Destiny 2 launched. Shadow Shot in tandem with the Deadfall passive can crowd control and give a defense down debuff to a massive area for an incredibly long duration, and the Orpheus Rig exotic perk grants super energy for each enemy you tether, which means you get to use your super a lot. That alone is amazing, but the rest of your kit does a decent job of making sure that your neutral game is still valuable enough to make sure you don't feel useless without super energy. With that said, the Way of the Trapper is not known for having an incredibly powerful neutral game, but remember, it's still useful. Dodging to turn invisible with Vanishing Step is a get out of jail free card. Anytime the shit is about to hit the fan, dodge. Your girlfriend's on her way home but your side chick is still on the couch, dodge. Didn't pay your taxes, the IRS is gonna find you unless you dodge. Seriously though, the ability to hide from enemies is a great way to reposition yourself, sneak through difficult areas to reach objectives, and probably the most valuable of all, resurrecting dead teammates to prevent your group from wiping. This utility on its own is fantastic, but it's made even better because of the Hunter dodge's short cooldown. Most Hunters will have their mobility high enough to reduce their class ability cooldown below 20 seconds, and that means you'll be able to hide from enemies pretty much whenever you want. Your melee ability Snare Bomb is the weakest part of your kit, but it serves the exact same function as Corrosive Smoke on the Way of the Wraith, only this time you can make your throws preemptively. If you know a location where enemies are going to spawn, you can place a bomb there and they'll get crowd controlled as soon as they walk by and be easy to pick off. Finally, your ability to sprint and crouch walk faster is nice. It's not something you'll notice after playing the Way of the Trapper for an extended time, but when you switch away from it, you'll feel the pain of it being gone. Now, where does the Way of the Trapper go on a tier list? Well, your offensive potential is lacking when you don't have your super. Your grenades are at their base level functionality, and your melee provides minor crowd control, but that's super though. Besides all the crowd control and damage you can dish out with a well-placed tether, you'll also be making a lot of orbs for your team to fuel their supers, which will in turn fuel your super again. Look, it's undeniable, the Way of the Trapper is S tier, but like some of the other subclass branches in the game, it does suffer from an annoying problem. It's only S tier when played in a very specific way. Without the Orpheus Rig's exotic boots, the Way of the Trapper is still great, but it's not a cut above the rest, and believe it or not, that's not me saying the Orpheus Rigs are too strong. The overwhelming majority of exotic armor in Destiny 2 is just way too weak. But that's a topic for another day. Last up, we have the recently reworked bottom branch of the Nightstalker, the Way of the Pathfinder. Your melee ability is Vanish in Smoke. You throw a smoke bomb that makes you and nearby allies invisible and grants a stack of the buff Heart of the Pack. This buff can be stacked 3 times and provides weapon haste, which increases your reload speed and handling, increases your mobility, resilience, and recovery. Lockdown is a passive that causes grenade effects to last twice as long. Combat Provisions is another passive. Damaging enemies with grenades grants melee cooldown reduction, and making yourself or allies invisible grants grenade cooldown reduction. Finally, we have the passive ability Mobius Quiver, and this is an augment for the Shadow Shot super. You can now fire multiple Shadow Shot attacks, and Shadow Shots deal bonus damage against tethered enemies. Defeated enemies grant a stack of Heart of the Pack, in addition to creating orbs. The Way of the Trapper used its super to propel itself to the top of the charts. The Way of the Pathfinder is trying to bring itself there with an incredible neutral game. Let's see how high up it can go. Vanish in Smoke is another get-out-of-jail-free card, just like Vanishing Step, but this time you can use it on your teammates too, and it provides the buff Heart of the Pack, and it reduces the cooldown of your grenades. What's really interesting here is that if we separate things into their individual pieces, Vanish in Smoke being the melee, Heart of the Pack being the buff, and Combat Provisions being the passive, on their own, each one is good, but when they work together, they're great. It goes something like this. Turning yourself invisible, that's cool. Turning yourself invisible and getting a buff, that's cooler. Turning yourself invisible, getting a buff, and reducing the cooldown of your grenades, that's amazing. Moving on from there, the lockdown passive doubling the duration of your grenades is a simple but effective way to increase your damage output, and since a good number of subclass branches in the game don't have abilities in their kit to enhance grenades, lockdown is a top tier passive. But once again, it goes even farther than just the raw damage output. Every tick of damage caused by your grenade is reducing the cooldown of your melee, which means you can spend a lot more time invisible, which makes you incredibly safe. But you can't forget about the other cooldown reduction stuff and the Heart of the Pack. It's a little bit repetitive, but all of this stuff is working so well together that it has to be repeated over and over and over again, just like you'll be repeating the gameplay loop over and over and over again. The Way of the Pathfinder is a little bit more complicated than the average subclass branch in Destiny 2, but when I look at the main 3 abilities in the subclass branch, it makes me very happy because this represents the best of what Destiny 2's class design has to offer. We saw a similar thing with the Warlock's Attunement of Grace, the Titan's Code of the Commander, and the Hunter's own Way of 1,000 Cuts. When your abilities are used together in the correct way, you're rewarded with more ability usage. Another thing I'm glad to say about the Pathfinder and most of the other S-tier subclasses in the game is that they feel fun to use with a variety of exotic armor pieces. The statement I made before about most exotic armor in Destiny 2 being bad is still true, but out of the limited selection of good, the Pathfinder can choose how it wants to play, and that's important, though it's not a major criteria that affects my overall ranking. Remember, the Way of the Trapper is only S-tier because of the Orpheus rigs. Before we wrap this one up, we gotta talk a little bit about Mobius Quiver and the augmentation of the Shadow Shot super. Instead of firing a single arrow for crowd control, you fire multiple, which essentially makes Shadow Shot a long-ranged roaming super. It does well enough at picking off packs of minors and majors, but the real selling point of this one is its ability to deal increased damage against tethered enemies. I've mentioned before that I don't think roaming supers typically deal enough damage over their full duration. When I activate an ultimate ability, I want it to be strong enough to make me feel like I've gained more ground over my enemies than I would have in my base form. The weaker roaming supers in Destiny 2 get stopped in their tracks by a thick major or a mini-boss, but Mobius Quiver allows me to power through them with massively increased damage once my shots tether them. It's a great design choice that sits with all the other great choices that were made in the Way of the Pathfinder. And with that said, the Way of the Pathfinder is going to sneak its way into S tier. And there we go, the Nightstalker has been officially added to the tier list. The Trapper and the Pathfinder wound up being amazing, but the Way of the Wraith is all the way at the bottom, and it's going to be there until it gets the buffs that it deserves. Its gameplay loop feels incomplete, and bringing it in any content feels like a genuine waste of time. And that's really sad because it has so much potential to be the master of stealth and the ultimate assassin. Before we close out completely, I want to give a special thank you to my buddy Ryan for helping me with the Way of the Wraith introduction for this video. It's always nice to do something silly every once in a while, so I greatly appreciate the assistance. If you want to listen to more stuff that Ryan and I do together, we have a podcast on soundcloud.com/iBluairJgR where you can listen to us ramble about video games for about an hour. There are currently 22 episodes. It's a good time. With all of that said, we are going to wrap things up here, but don't worry, there's plenty more coming in the future. The Beyond Light expansion is launching very soon for Destiny 2, so there's going to be more subclasses to talk about, more builds to make, more exotic armor, more exotic weapons, and of course, we have one more subclass to add to the tier list, and that is the Arcstrider, so stay tuned for that as well. As always, the name of the game is Destiny 2, the name of the channel is iBluairJgR. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.